Yeah, so my name's Sujit D'Mello. Been a member of BCUG, I think, for maybe about 3-4 years. Started when they were meeting in person, and it was nice to meet up with everyone. I think in Tinton Falls for the most part. But been enjoying the online presence now, the one with Zoom. So I do agree that's a good forum to meet. I've been working at Microsoft for about 18 years now as a software engineer. Still continue to be a software engineer. I know a lot of people say, why are you still programming? And I say, yep, I'm still programming, just like I was, when I got out of college. So it's something I certainly enjoy doing, and I've continued doing it till today. One thing that's kind of come up recently in the last 10 years or so is the advent of the cloud. And I think we all know about that. But when I was in the early days of the cloud, I realized that there wasn't much of a presence that Microsoft had in terms of the podcast space as it relates to the cloud. And so I went on this journey of creating a podcast to talk about the Azure cloud, which is Microsoft's cloud. That was the topic of the podcast. And as a result, I've learned a lot about podcasting, about how you can be good at it, why it could be difficult at times. And I've collected this little PowerPoint deck of things I've learned over the years, which I'd like to share with you today. Before I start, I would like to ask the members of the audience here, what are the top podcasts that you listen to? If anybody can come off the mute button and let us know of any podcasts that you listen to today.
Actually, one of the reasons why I was interested in having you present about this is because even though podcasting is not brand new, I never listened to any podcasts. And I only started even looking for something that might be interesting to me as a result of you introducing this idea again into my consciousness.
Fair enough. Okay. I think then we can certainly dive into that. Is there anybody else that has ever heard any podcasts or even maybe not on their phone, but maybe on their computer or anything like that? How about YouTube? Do you watch like shows on YouTube, like people talking about stuff on YouTube? Maybe subscribers.
I do a lot.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's kind of like almost like a form of podcasting in a sense. It's just as a video element to it. So that's some people say that's a form of podcasting too. So
I listen to various tech shows, science and technology shows, and there's can't think of his name now. The Tested, the guy who was a white-haired guy on MythBusters. He's got a show.
Oh,
Adam Savage.
Yes,
I don't listen to these regularly. The one I listen to most right now is Beau of the Fifth Column.
And you watch that on your computer at regular times or on your phone? How do you consume that?
It's usually consumed on the computer, although I'm really serious of thinking of switching more to podcast form because, he's got video, but there's really nothing on it or much except him talking.
Understood. Yep. I think that's, I think you'll learn a lot with what I have to share here. So thanks for that.
Sujit, I have my son-in-law is a fisherman, and he does a fishing podcast.
Oh, that's amazing! Look at that. Good for him. Yeah.
He's been doing that for years.
Excellent. All right. Okay, so let's just move on with this presentation now. So the agenda is kind of loosely like this, and I think John had shared this ahead of time as well. But I'm just going to give a perspective from somebody who may be thinking of starting a podcast, and then how you would consume a podcast. So we'll look at both sides of podcasting, and then give you some tips and tricks on how you can be successful at podcasting. And then if we have time, I actually want to show you how you would publish a podcast, because as it turns out, we just recorded our last podcast 2 days ago, and I'm about ready to publish it today. So I can go through some of the steps that I go through when I publish a podcast, just so you know that it's not some dark science or something like that. It's actually the technology for podcasting. And I won't give away too much right now. Is actually very old, and I think almost everybody here will know about it. So let's see if we have time, and I'd like to kind of dive into that. All right. So let me first start by talking about why, why you would think about starting a podcast. So a podcast is just a kind of a high level of what a podcast is. As Sandy and Gilbert and others have said, it's essentially people talking about some topic that they feel passionate about, right? And that's really where a podcast first comes up. But it's a big time commitment. I'm sure if Sandy were to talk to his son-in-law, or he'd find out that it takes a few hours every week. If you're doing a weekly podcast, it's at least 2 or 3 hours a week of time commitment. So you got to be sure that you want to do this, right? But there's a lot of benefits for somebody who wants to start a podcast. One is it forces you to keep up with the technology if it's technical podcasts. Obviously, if it's something else like fishing, it kind of also forces you to be on top of that, of that topic. So in fishing, in that case, there's a lot of public growth that comes out of it, personal growth. For example, it has definitely improved my public speaking. I always found it difficult speaking in a public forum before, in a big forum like this. And I think because of podcasting, I was able to overcome that fear and learn how to speak carefully, learn how not to have ums and ahs when I speak more fluently. Writing also improved. So it definitely helped from a personal growth perspective. Of course, one of the things that podcasting does is establishes you as an expert in the community. So whatever community it might be, you would be seen as an expert. Like Gilbert said, he kind of goes, he watches Savage show. Savage is known to be an expert in that, in blowing up things, I suppose. So, you would go there, you would that you want to listen to him for what he has to say.
Oh, no blowing up.
What's that?
No blowing up on.
No blowing up on Savage. Okay.
No, it's although he does reminisce on the Mythbuster days, he's more into a maker, how to make things now.
Good. So he's making some things instead of blowing them up. Sounds good. And then, of course, career growth, not only inside of a company. Of course, I work at Microsoft, so it definitely helps me inside the company, but even outside, your name is out there. If you ever have to look for a job, I think people will recognize your name. And, if you're working for a company and you have sort of commitments that you have to do for your role, it certainly has helped me. But that's kind of only if you're doing it as part of a company job. So, what are the themes for podcasts? You already heard about some of the themes, like a maker theme or a fishing theme, for example. Whatever it is, you have to be very passionate about this topic, right? To be able to speak about it confidently and even discuss it with other people, for that matter. One of the recommendations I have given folks who want to start a podcast is not to pick a theme that is very niche or very narrow in its focus. One of the two problems that come out of that is there's fairly low interest. So yes, you might get a few people listening in, but it certainly would not attract a wide audience. And secondly is that one of the, I'm sure, if you start looking at podcasts, you will find thousands of podcasts out there that only started a few shows and died, right? They only go for a few episodes. They really don't go very far. And that's one of the problems with podcasts is that if you don't have enough content, you're going to run out of content sooner or later. And that's why you have these niche shows that eventually run out of content. But if you take something more general purpose, like fishing, for example, maybe there's a lot to talk about, and you're unlikely to run out of content. The passion, of course, is just not good. Is not enough. You have to be very good at it. You want to be confident if you're talking in a public forum about that topic and not be fumbling around. So certainly you have to have that. I recommend going for a shorter podcast. Podcasts can vary in length. If you go about looking for podcasts today, they can vary from about 30 minutes to about an hour. I prefer the more on the 30-minute side. One of the reasons I prefer that when I started doing this is a lot of people listen to podcasts when they're exercising. That's a very popular time to listen to a podcast. You put your earphones on, put you on a phone, and you kind of go on the treadmill or on the bike, and you listen to a podcast while you're exercising. And I'm sure, I don't know how long you guys exercise, but I generally exercise about 30 minutes at a time, right? And so for me, that was a good enough time, and we got the feedback that that's a good time to run the podcast. So our podcasts are typically about 30 minutes long. Of course, if you know your audience and your audience has a capacity to listen for longer, you can certainly go longer. But I would start at 30 minutes. And if you're looking for a podcast, I would also look for podcasts that fall in that range. I think once you've gone beyond 30 minutes, your attention span will not be there. If you're dealing with a technical podcast, like for example, Gilbert's talking about the maker community. Yes, I mean, you get pretty technical in there, but when you're talking in an audio format, there's not a lot you can kind of explain. You can't really draw diagrams and whatnot, right? You have to be able to verbalize everything you're talking about. So you don't want to get into a podcast that's too technical or too deep, where it's difficult to follow what the person is saying. For example, if you think about, we had the photography podcast, show on the BCUG a few months ago. And you can imagine if that was done on an audio-only format, it would be very difficult, right? You wouldn't understand what was happening because you needed some reference, some graphic reference to understand what the person was saying. So, yeah, I mean, you have to make sure that your technical depth is not too deep. And if you're going to start a podcast, this is something to keep in mind, is you have to have content for at least 15 to 20 shows. If you go out there looking for podcasts today, you'll find that there are some podcasts where it's just two people that come on the show, the same two people or three people that talk about stuff. Okay, so that's one kind of podcast you're going to find. Then there's another kind of podcast you're going to find where there's two people that are asking the questions, and maybe there's other people who are brought in from show to show to answer the questions or discuss something. And there's more like a dialogue between these people. But the two people are fixed, and the other guests, so we call them the co-hosts, and the other two are the others who may be called the guests. And they would change every show. Now, for the first 15 or 20 episodes, if you're going to start a new podcast, you have to be ready to do it yourself. You're unlikely to get a guest coming in on a brand new podcast because the guest has never heard of your podcast. You're not well known. It takes a while for you to be known in the podcast community. It probably takes more than 20 episodes, but at least 50 to 20 episodes, you have to be ready to do it with yourself, or you and a partner together. You have to be ready to kind of run those shows completely by yourself without any guests. Once you pass that critical kind of point and you get more of an exposure in the podcast community, you might find guests are more likely to come onto your show. And so that's why I say always be sure you have enough content for at least 15 to 20 episodes before you get started. Now, of course, we've talked about how the formats are. There's generally two formats, audio and video. I think the folks have been talking about the YouTube option, which is definitely popular. When we started our podcast, we decided on an audio version, primarily, like I said, because people who wanted to consume it did it when they were exercising, or when they were biking, or when they were driving in and from work or back to home or something like that. And so that audio format was very important for us, and we got a lot of feedback that they appreciated that. So as I mentioned earlier, one of the problems with audio is that we have to keep the discussion very high level. We can't go too deep or too technical because we can't have any pictures or demos. At the time, like I mentioned early on, Microsoft did not have any official podcast presence on for Azure, and so we decided to start one. Me and another gentleman, a colleague of mine, who's still co-host with me. We decided to start this approximately just under 10 years ago. Now, if you're planning to start a podcast, you want to find a topic like this that's not been covered. If there's already 5 people out there that have podcasts on a topic, then it's no point having a 6th person or being the 6th person talking about that, because then you're kind of competing with them. So you got to look for areas where you feel there's not enough representation, and maybe start your own topic, your own podcast. Similar to the point where you go looking out for podcasts, right? You go look out for certain topics, maybe a hobby that you have, and you're going to find maybe there's only a handful of people that talk about that. Similar to that, if you feel like, hey, there's nobody that's talking about my hobby, right? Whatever, wood carving or whatever it may be, so then go ahead and start a podcast on wood carving, right? That's what will trigger you to start the podcast, your own podcast. Now, were there any questions before I continue? I want to just pause here for a second. All right. So let me talk about how we go about recording a podcast, okay? And you'll see a picture of me in my basement here, which is the same basement I'm sitting in now, just a different angle, but it's the same basement. So I generally sit in my basement and I record my podcast. I have a Blue Yeti microphone over there, which is what I'm using right now as well. As you can see, it's right off camera here. And, essentially, there's no magic. You just use, just like John's recording this meeting on Zoom. I could take that meeting and make it into a podcast if I wanted to, right? You got to make sure you have a good microphone, quiet space, good audio. You can't see it behind me, but on the wall behind this setup over here, I have soundproofing panels on the wall to avoid bouncing, my voice bouncing off the wall and hitting the microphone at the back, just to avoid to keep the audio crisp. So there's a little bit of setup that's required just to make sure you have a good space over here. But other than that, there's nothing complicated. It's just, any PC or Mac that you may have, you can run Teams or Zoom on it and record it. When you record the meeting, as you've seen, when John creates the podcast, the YouTube version of it, it's just a video file, right? It's an MP4 file or MPEG file that you get, and essentially you have to take that file and do some processing with it. So what does that post-production look like when you get this podcast with this video file? So I think I mentioned this when I did the last session on the top Windows programs that I have that I like, and one of them was Audacity, which I think many of you have used or like. And Audacity is a nice free audio editor. It lets you import a video file. It extracts the audio component of it, and then lets you do lots of audio processing on it, right? So there's some audio processing we want to do on this file. Before we publish it out and make it available for everybody on the internet to consume. Things like we remove the awkward silences in there. When you listen to a podcast, you'll notice that there aren't a whole lot of pauses. The podcasts flow pretty smoothly, and that's because they remove all the pauses in between. It helps to keep the podcast shorter and makes it easier to hear as well. We also remove all of the silence, the clicks that you may hear. Of course, I have a pop filter on my microphone, so hopefully there's not a whole lot of clicks here, but sometimes you do get clicks in the audio, and Audacity can remove them as well. And then finally is to normalize the highs and the lows, because if you're talking with other folks on a Zoom call, for example, somebody's mic might be lower than mine, and so everyone sounds at a different volume. There's a setting in Audacity to just equalize everything so that everybody comes at the equal volume. And finally, once you've done all this processing, you can just convert it to an MP3 file, right? And that's it, right? Essentially, the whole podcasting world runs on MP3 files. So that's one of the kind of things that you'll figure out is that it's when you listen to a podcast, you're downloading an MP3 file to your phone or your computer, and you're listening to it, and that's the end of it. Now, we put some metadata in the MP3 file, things like, they call them tags, like the names of the hosts, the guests, episode name, the year it was recorded, things like that. Another thing that you will hear if you listen to podcasts is at the start of every podcast, there may be some kind of a music, and at the end of the podcast, there'll be some music, and then, of course, there'll be the podcast in the middle. And that's entry and exit music. That's what they call it. And you can get royalty-free music from ccmixter.org. That's the website that I got it from. They have about 10,000 royalty-free clips that you can choose from. So I kind of went through them, did some searching, and picked up a few that I liked, and then we kind of use that as a start and end of our podcast. Now, once you have recorded the podcast, you want to make it available for everybody else, and this is kind of one of the secrets of podcasting, right? You have to kind of host the feed to your podcast somewhere. That's what it's all called. It's called the feed. And you'll see in the bullet point in the middle of the screen over there, the entire podcasting world runs on an RSS feed, right? Like that's what I said earlier. I'm sure everybody here has used RSS in some form or the other, and essentially podcasts work on RSS, on the RSS format. So when you are consuming a podcast, you're actually consuming an RSS feed from somewhere, and that RSS feed has certain elements in it which tell it, what the name of the podcast is, some description, maybe some pictures, and also what the name of that MP3 file is that is corresponding to that podcast episode. And so that's essentially what you have to host somewhere. Of course, there are third parties that host podcasts for you for a small fee these days. I think it ranges from $10 a month to maybe a little higher, depending on the features that they provide. But essentially, that's what they let you do. They let you upload your audio, put some pictures, put some information there, and they make all that RSS feed essentially available to you. When I started doing this, we just used some open source software called blogengine.net, and that's what we hosted on Microsoft Azure, and that is what it's still running today. I'm happy to say that the website is still going after 10 years. So it's good, because if I have to redo this, it'll take quite a lot of effort. But essentially, it's hosting a podcast is nothing more than hosting a blog. I'm sure many of you have either consumed blogs or maybe even have written your own blogs. Essentially, it's just the podcast is just a blog, and each of the posts in the blog is the episode, right? So if you go to azpodcast.com, which is the website for the Azure podcast, there are 458 posts in there. That's what they call them, right? And each post is a separate episode. So there's nothing too complex with that. But one of the things with making a podcast feed, the RSS feed, more easy to consume by our smartphones today, like most people today listen to podcasts on their phones. And there are many apps, including the iTunes app, or even Spotify and Audible and whatnot. But any third-party podcast app as well. In order for them to consume the RSS feed, there are certain elements in the RSS feed that have to be added. And there is something called the Google Feed Burner, which is a free service that Google has offered for many, many years, that does this automatically. It takes your RSS feed and it makes it look nice, so that the podcast applications, the podcast apps, can consume it properly. Okay. And I think I do have a little, this is what the feed burner looks like today. It's actually, it used to be a lot more complex than this, but I think, Google, as with most other things, have been cutting costs. So they've kind of trimmed this service down quite a bit, but it does enough as far as my needs go. And as you can see, this is how I indicated where my original RSS feed is. And then it adds all the additional elements to that feed and makes it available here. And if you pull down the elements of the feed, this is what it looks like. This is like a typical RSS feed over here that comes out of it. You can see that there's the title of the show over there. And here's the latest episode, right? And here's some information. The main thing that you want to see is there is an MP3 file in here somewhere. That is the most important part. Let's see where I can find that. Let's do a search for MP3. .mp3. No, that's not what I want to look for. Dot. And there you go. So there's the MP3 in the text, right? But where you want to see it, you want to have this enclosure field over here. And you can see how it has created the special enclosure field with the MP3, the link to the MP3 hosted in it. And this is what the FeedBurner application does. It just makes it look nicer so that the podcast applications can consume your podcast a lot more easily. In terms of the kind of overall flow for doing this, right? You record the podcast, like I was saying earlier, you do the Audacity, work on it, and then you get an MP3 file. You upload that MP3 to some public storage. I use Azure Blob Storage, and then that public link for that storage for that MP3 file, which is what you saw over here. This is the public link right here. So you can actually click on this link, and it would download the MP3 for you. That public link is what is put inside of the RSS feed, right? And then that's passed to FeedBurner. FeedBurner will then augment that RSS feed, and it is consumed directly by the podcast app. So if you open up any podcast app today and look for the Azure podcast, it'll find that RSS feed, and it will just show you all of the episodes in it, and you'll be able to play it instantly, right? So it's a very simple process, right? Using RSS feeds as a mechanism, but it's surprisingly effective. Now, when you run the podcast app on your phone, you're actually downloading this MP3 directly from here using this arrow on the side here. So that's where it downloads the MP3 to your phone, and it plays it just like any other MP3 file. It's no different at that point. Some people have talked about how they consume YouTube channels, and we also have a YouTube channel. But for us, it's more like a secondary channel. It's not the primary. The primary is audio. But we did find a lot of people like Gilbert, for example, or anybody else who has looked at YouTube subscriptions. It's easy for them to subscribe to these channels on YouTube, right? Because they're already subscribing to a whole lot of other things on YouTube. And so it's another channel that they can subscribe and they can consume. So, we said, hey, let's just make it easy. We just upload all of our recordings, the meeting recordings, directly to YouTube as they are, right? And you can see that this is just standard recording of meetings similar to the regular Zoom recordings that we're doing over here. Now, what we found out is that, with the YouTube, of course, hosting YouTube is free, so there's no cost, obviously. And so it's good for somebody who's hosting, who's uploading those recordings. It's also good if you want to have demonstrations and show things because you have the video there. But it's not a great, for me, if you're just going to have general discussions, I think somebody was saying how, just hearing two people talk all the time gets kind of boring on video, right? And so that's one of the things that we've seen is it's not great for just to have two people talk on video. It's kind of annoying to just sit and listen to two people talk. But the subscribing feature that YouTube has is convenient. For tech content, which is what we have, we found that is not a whole lot of appetite to listen to YouTube for tech content. And of course, as you all know, when you look at the YouTube, you have to listen to the ads, and that can be a little annoying. So I have some tips and tricks over here on, what it might be if you do decide to host your own podcast. Okay. One thing is that I definitely recommend you have more than one co-host. Don't be the only person on the show, because nothing more boring than hearing one person talk all the time. You want to have at least two people, more if you can. I would say have 4 or 5 co-hosts, because this way, if some weeks somebody's not available, they're on vacation or they have other plans, at least there's enough people to kind of cover and make the show go on. So that's another recommendation. You have to have a regular cadence. If you go out there looking for podcasts today, you'll find that the more popular podcasts, the ones that show up on the top of your list, are the ones that are on a regular cadence. Maybe every week. Some of them are maybe more than once a week, but they're on some regular cadence. If you do it once a month, sometimes that's a little too far apart. So you want to shoot for at least once a week or once every other week is what I would suggest. And if you're talking about on podcasts and you do talk about whatever topic you're passionate about, avoid using too many acronyms. People sometimes don't understand the acronyms, so you have to make sure everybody can understand what you're talking about. We do use, we do create a Twitter account so that we can inform our listeners what's going on and maybe take suggestions from them, etc. But you need to have somebody keeping an eye on that Twitter account. Of course, there's other things you could use, like a OneNote to share kind of ideas with your co-hosts and things like that. Also, when you do have multiple co-hosts on a show, sometimes they tend to talk over each other, which can be also annoying on a podcast to listen to many people talking over each other. It's annoying anyway, anytime that happens, but it's even more annoying on a podcast. And so using a way to coordinate access for people talking is very important. So I think Zoom has a feature where you can raise your hand and talk, and so does Team. And so we use that feature a lot, right? The co-host will raise their hand. Of course, the person who is listening to the podcast or listening to the video will not see those hands, but at least when you're actually recording it, you can do it in a coordinated manner. Once you've kind of passed those 20 or 25 episodes that you've done on your own, you can start going out. You can start going out and looking for other guests to come on, right? So if I guess Sandy said he listens to a fishing podcast, or his son-in-law has a fishing podcast, and then if he wants to find other people to come on his show to talk about something about fishing, maybe it's about trout fishing or whatever it may be the case, you have to go and find these people, right? Where do you go and find them? So one is to just find people in your own community, right? In our community, for example, if I were to have a show on Linux, I would know that I would reach out to someone like Sergey, right? Because he's obviously known to us to be very, very good at Linux. And so you can kind of get him on the show and have him talk about some Linux stuff. Similar to that, if you have somebody that that's good at what you want to talk about, do invite them to the show, have them do it. The other one is to go out to discussion boards, things like the BCUG or our bulletin board service that we have, groups.io. You go there and see, okay, what are people talking about? Who seems to be providing the most feedback on a particular topic? Oh, that person must be good at that topic. Maybe they can come on the show and talk about it. So that's another way we source guests as well, just keeping an eye on these things. So you got to go do some homework and look around and find people that are out there. Because people, everyone's got expertise at something, right? At least that's my philosophy. And it's just a matter of finding somebody who has the expertise that you're looking for. Of course, there's also you can also look at the world of the internet in general. You go on Twitter, you start searching around, see who's kind of blabbing about these things more often than others. Reach out to them, DM them, direct message them, find out if they're interested in coming on the show, so you could source them that way as well. And of course, if you're really popular, then you do get companies reaching out to you. In our case, we do have companies that are, constantly asking us if they can come on the show. That's okay. And then of course, just as you get guests coming on the show, you also want to make sure you have more subscribers to your show, right? How do you find podcasts? Most people will just search for it. You go on to Google and you say, look for a particular podcast or look for some topic and see if there's podcasts out there, right? Like, for example, if you just look for the fishing podcast or something like that, maybe you find one that Sandy was talking about. So you have to make sure that your podcast is out there so people can find it, right? If you create this RSS feed of your podcast and nobody knows about it, there's going to be nobody listening to your show, right? That's the thing, and that's the truth for anything you put on the internet. So how do you make this more discoverable? One is the most common thing is to just put it on the search engines, right? When we started the Azure podcast, I had to set up an account with Google Webmaster Tools, add my RSS feed to Google, so that it would show up in the Google search results. Same thing with Bing. And then over most recently, I've had to do it with Spotify. So if you go to Spotify now and you look for the Agile podcast, you'll find it right away because it's part of Spotify. The same with iTunes. If you use any of the Apple iTunes podcasting apps, you'll find it there as well. And Audible too. You can ask Alexa to, for example, to play the podcast. So all of these things, require some additional steps to go in, so that to make your podcast more discoverable. Of course, if you're into LinkedIn and things like that, there's of course things you can do there as well to increase the audience. And of course, definitely don't want to forget about the global audience. I have a list on the right-hand side which shows you the top countries that our subscribers come from today. Of course, the United States, United Kingdom, Canada, Sweden, Australia. We see we have somebody from Australia today, so they're number five on the list here. And then Denmark, Germany, Finland, India, Netherlands, Ireland, etc. So let's not forget, podcasting, the audience is all over the world. People will want to talk about fishing from any part of the world, right? So just keep that in mind. And then, of course, we have this. This slide's a little bit technical, but we do want to keep a track of, all the or like how many people are downloading our show. So I have created some kind of scripts. I've written some scripts, PowerShell scripts actually, that run and kind of try and figure out how many people are downloading our podcast, and that information is put on our website automatically. If you go to our website, you'll see a number over there which indicates how many downloads were there over the last week. So that is kind of my presentation. I just want to stop and see if there's any questions or people would like to kind of me to answer any other questions about podcasting that I can help with. I know some people said they were new to podcasting; they had not done it before. I'm not sure that this presentation will directly help there, but I'd be happy to kind of answer any questions in that space if you still have them.
I was wondering, do people start podcasting to make money? Like how, I understand how advertising is done on websites, but here with an audio and an RSS feed, is there money to be made from advertising, or do most podcasters want to monetize?
It's a good question, and that kind of tells it kind of, if you go back to when podcasting first started, I would say it was not for money, right? People were doing it for their interest, for their passion. They wanted to share, maybe get known, get their name out there, like I mentioned. But over time, for sure, more recently, it has become a much more commercial business. So if someone's doing a fishing podcast, for example, it's quite likely that they might put sponsor messages on the fishing podcast. So just like we have entry music and all that, they may have a sponsor message weaved into their audio, and of course, then the sponsors would pay them some money. In our case, we made the decision not to talk about anything sales or commercial related, right? It was all about what we thought we were passionate about and what our guests are passionate about, without trying to sell anything to anybody. So it really depends on what. But you're right, John. There's a lot of podcasts out there today, and a lot of money to be made of podcasts. I've heard some podcasters that have 20 million subscribers, they do make a lot of money, right? There's no doubt about that. But then they play a lot of ads on their podcasts, while they're going on. So they do have that commercial. Sometimes the person who's coming on their show could be a paid guest, right? So the guest is there with an agenda to try and push something. So then there's that part to it too. They pay to come on the show and to talk about something, maybe push their product or push an agenda of some sort. But yeah, there's definitely, just like in the YouTube world where people publish on YouTube and TikTok and all that to make money, podcasting is no different these days from that perspective. Definitely, a lot of people do it for the money. I don't, for sure. I just do it because I enjoy doing it, and my co-hosts luckily enjoy doing it as well.
And you keep doing it over 400 times. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, it's been good so far. Yeah.
Now, what you described here really sounded like there was a lot of pieces that were not trivial, but we don't have any sense. Like, you've been doing this for what, 9 years? You said
9+ years. 9+
Yeah.
years. Yeah, almost 10 years. Yeah.
Could you give us some sense, like, somebody just starting isn't going to do all of those things? You've told us everything you've learned over 9 years, but if somebody was just getting started, how might they ramp up? Can you give us a sense about that?
So just so I understand, you want to say how they might ramp up to start a new podcast, correct?
Well, you're not going to be getting everything into Google and get a Google and all this stuff that you talked about immediately. Like, you're not going to set
Correct.
all of that stuff up before you ever do anything and get 20 podcasts and ready for the next one, and also have to spend the time searching for topics and people and everything like that. This is a full-time job. How much time do you put into this?
Yeah, that's a good point. Initially, of course, we spent in the first few weeks, months, or whatever, definitely more time there, just because, especially 10 years ago, podcasting was not as popular as it was today. Right nowadays, everybody and anybody has their own podcast, but in those days there were very few, and so just understanding where to put this, how to create it, was difficult. But that was so it just take a little bit of time then. To directly answer your question, these days it's a lot easier to start your own podcast because there are so many public services now that help in that space. I mentioned earlier, some of them are like, $10 a month or something like that to host a podcast. They make it really convenient. They even have the tools to do the recording on the website. So it's kind of a one-stop shop. You pay that one fee and you kind of, plug in a microphone to your computer and that's it, right? You can go anywhere and publish your podcast. From a publishing perspective, most of the hurdles have been taken away. When you do it through those services, they take care of publishing it, publicizing it for you. It automatically goes on the iTunes and the Spotify and whatnot. Maybe it'll charge you a couple of bucks extra a month for some of this for some of those features, but all of those are a click away, right? We chose to do it like the more traditional way, which is doing it by hand almost. Primarily to understand what exactly happens under the covers, and also because we didn't want to, spend the money to do it. We wanted to keep the costs down. Even where we host a podcast today, we use Microsoft Azure to host it. I think I have it over here. Here's our Azure subscription, and you can see all of our MP3s starting from episode number 1. That is on our Azure website. So this thing, fortunately, doesn't cost us any money because we use something called the MSDN subscription. So when you are a software developer, Microsoft gives you a free Azure subscription, and so that's what we use. So it's free. When I say it's free, it's good for about $150 a month, and it costs us only about $25 a month to run the podcast on an Azure subscription, and so. But this year we have the flexibility. We had to learn something about how to host it. Yes, it would be convenient to pay the $10 or $15 and do it through a service. But I think we've learned a lot more by doing it this way. And at least for us, it doesn't cost us any money to host it this way.
The question is, you have an online index to your episodes?
You're asking if we have an index? Is that what you said?
Yes.
Yeah, so on our website, we have this archive button. You can go all the way back to the very first episode here. Yeah, which is from 2013. Yeah.
Okay.
And the topic that is covered in all your episodes is about the Azure cloud, how to use it?
It's all somehow related to the Azure cloud, right? And so it's actually a good kind of explanation as to how we got started. I mentioned that when we about 10 years ago, when the cloud was becoming something more important, we realized that there wasn't anything to talk about the Azure cloud. But what I was listening to podcasts at the time, and I heard one on the AWS cloud, right? And I was like, okay, that sounds like a nice way to learn, right? Because I started listening to that AWS cloud, and within after just listening to about 10 episodes, I felt I was much more knowledgeable about AWS cloud, and I thought that was really nice. I was like, wait a minute, why isn't there something for Azure like this? And so that's what drove us to start something like this for Azure. And so the idea is same thing. It's for people to listen to this to learn about Azure, right? If you don't know anything about Azure, you want to just informally understand what it has to offer, this is a good way to do it by listening to the podcast. So that's the theme that we created. It's a theme for where you can go and learn about new Azure technologies, learn about cloud computing, specifically to Azure, of course. And, maybe our audience is made up of a mix of people who are enthusiasts, so who are cloud enthusiasts, some who are just, generally interested. And then there are some who are hardcore engineers and software architects and software engineers and whatnot who want to get a lot more out of it.
You heard Andy Kerrigan compliment Fred Cagle about putting chapters in the YouTube videos. Now, I'm looking at your list here, and I see, the most.
This is our YouTube channel. I think you muted yourself, John.
I let go of my space bar. If I wanted to find a specific topic that you covered someplace in these almost 500 episodes, how would I do that?
Yeah, so that's a good point. So when we do the podcast episodes, right, we have a tag cloud over here. So we use tags as much as possible, and you can so you can search by tags. You can also just search by any term on the top here. For example, if you wanted to look for, let's say, video, let's say, right? And so then there it is. It talks about the video indexer service on Azure, right? Or things like, or something related to video in some way. So that's one way, is to use the search term over here on the website. I believe you could also search in the YouTube channel as well over here. Similarly, YouTube, we only started publishing it. I don't know how far. It doesn't go back all the way back. I think we only have 91 episodes over here. So we only started YouTube in the last 3 years or something, or 2 to 3 years ago. We didn't do YouTube before that. It was only audio. But if you go back, it'll still search all of the text that's in here. Like with each episode, we kind of have some of the text about what the episode's about. And so if you search for some of those terms, you can find it this way as well. And these terms are also indexed by the search engines. So if you look for that topic on Google and you say, Azure podcast, about video processing, it'll take you here,
Does something like Google actually listen to the podcast and find words so that it would show up in the search?
No, that's why we have to add this metadata along with every episode. So when we edit the episode over here, we add all of this metadata over here, like some information about what the show is. The transcript of the show is not included here, if that's what you're asking. So we used to have the transcript. At one point, it was a Microsoft company policy that if we have a podcast over there had to be an audio transcript that people who were hard of hearing could download and read. And so we did that for a while. As a matter of fact, I think it's all that we picked it up with. This is the video indexer is actually the name of the service that will take a video and create a transcript out of it in Azure. So we actually used the video indexer service for a while and did it. But we found out that there was, there was nobody really using it, so we stopped doing it. But to answer your question, Google is just looking at whatever text we put on this web page over here, and it will search if you look for one of these things, it'll probably find it. It's not listening to what we have to say.
Let me go back to my question. How much time do you put into this every week?
It's about 2 to 3 hours a week.
And
we've got it down to a science now, and which is part of the why, right? Like I said, early on, it was a lot more of discovery on how to do it, took more time, but then we've kind of got it down to a science now, 2 to 3 hours a week. And because we have 6 co-hosts, so 6 of us, you can see our faces on the top here. We sometimes a couple of us even split the duties of post-production. So normally I'm the one who does most of the post-production, the Audacity and the uploading it to YouTube and whatnot. But now I have Russell Young over here, this gentleman who's just next to me in the picture, who is based out of London. He helps me out. So he does some of the post-production as well.
You mentioned that now there are websites or places that you can go that basically help you to do this. That sounded pretty much like WordPress for.
So there are WordPress. Of course, WordPress is good for just hosting any blog, right? So you can certainly just host your blog on WordPress. And like I said, this is what we did. Is nothing but a blog over here, where you can see it over here. It actually says blogs, and there are posts over here, and each episode is a post. And you can do that with WordPress, right? Of course, you could create that, and yeah, you can certainly do it. That's one way to do it. You still have to figure out where you're going to upload your MP3 files. Because you still need storage to upload the MP3 files. I'm not sure if WordPress gives you a lot of storage, but the MP3 files can take a lot of space. I'll give you an example. In ours, how much? Trying to see if there's a way we could figure out how much space it takes. Let me go back here. Episodes, container properties. I don't know if this is really going to show us. It doesn't, but I think it's in the, right now we have something like 7 or 8 gigabytes, or maybe even more of MP3s. Maybe I think it's more than that. And so that costs money. You have to find a space where you can store that. As you can imagine, we have to store all of the episodes all the way to episode number 1, right? So we have to keep them around for a long time. So besides the hosting just a blog, you have to think about storage. The new services that are out there. Let me just see if I can. I've not really looked at this. Let's see. Guys hosting the sites. Let me see which one. Yeah, of course, there's all of these. I don't know, let's just click on one of them. I've never used any of these, so I don't know how good or bad they are. But yeah, you can see here's one of them where everything is kind of built in, right? You're publishing, it sends it to all of the destination platforms. It's it even has the audio processing built in, right? You can see it generates your RSS feed. Everything is kind of done for you automatically. And so there's these services over here that you can use, and this will make it really easy. You don't have to you don't have to know everything that I just told you, right? You can focus on what am I going to talk about? Where am I going to find my guests? Where am I going to find the co-hosts? Where am I going to get advertising if that's what you want to do? So you can kind of focus on those things and not have to worry about the nitty-gritty of hosting it or producing it. Does that answer your question, John?
You're muted.
Yes.
All right. Thank you. That was a good question. Thanks. Good questions. So yeah, just to kind of give everyone an idea, I was just saying how we had recently done an episode with Elizabeth, right? I don't know if this is going to show I don't know if the audio is going to play here, but And on Teams with me, we have Evan and our special guest Elizabeth, who we're going to get to in just a minute. But before that, let's talk about some news. Evan, I put a few news items in the OneNote, so which I can cover. I don't know if you. Yeah. So just to give you an idea, but that's this is the most recent episode that we did. It's just us talking for about 30 minutes, right? And this is the recording. This is the whole recording.
The JSON mapping and figuring that out. But yeah, I mean, if you want to do any validation on it, it's quicker and easier to do it than going through kind of field by field, if you will, right?
Okay.
How about right? So once you kind of have something like this, right? If you have the video, I could take this video and post it directly to YouTube, and that's of course the easiest thing. I think most of you have done this before, may have done this before, but we can do it right now. Is just hit the create button in YouTube, upload the video, select the file. I'm going to select our file over there. I'll just change the name a little bit on the file. Okay, and let's just upload that file, right? And yeah, then we're going to give it some metadata. So let's say episode 458, integration patterns, right? You give it some description, Evan and Sujit talk to Elizabeth about the options we have in Azure to integrate external systems, files, and messages. All right, and then that's it. You kind of just have to click through that and make it a public thing, and voila, in about 1 hour, this will be available, right? YouTube takes about an hour to process the file. So this will be ready soon. So that's the audio, the video one is very easy. It's the audio one that does take a little bit of time. Like I said, you have to import it into Audacity and kind of do some work. So you kind of pull it over here. You get your desktop. You can pull the video in directly here. Episode 458.
Could you record it in Audacity, or is that not quite good enough?
Audacity does audio only, so we want to record the Meet Teams channel, the actual Zoom call or the Teams call, which includes video, just like it would when you watch the recording of this show. But we have to, in order to get the audio component, we have to use Audacity to extract the audio from the video. So that's what we did over here. Is
I understand.
To that, yeah, and so it extracted the.
You have more than audio in mind, then. Okay.
We wanted to put the video for the purpose of our listeners as well. So here we have, we've, like I said, we've got it in Audacity, and then you have to run a couple of effects over here. One of them we run is the compressor, which will kind of even out the highs and the lows for you. It'll kind of process that file and just take away all the highs and lows and make it a little more uniform. It's called the compressor. There's also something called the equalizer, which is actually different. And then we do truncate silence, which is here. And that, like I was saying, it's going to take away all of those little gaps that you see in here. It's going to make it a lot more, you can see it kind of took away all the excessive gaps, makes the audio sound a lot better. And then you can run the click removal as well, and that would remove any clicks in the audio, right? So that's kind of easy to do. And then once the file's ready, you can just upload it to blob storage, and it's ready to go. So right now, all I have to do is to export this file as an MP3. Oh, I forgot to do the important part, which is adding the music. So insert audio, Azure Podcasts. And let's just say the entry music. Where is that? Intro. Oh, yep. So we add the entry music there. And the way you do it is that you copy it from here. You take it over here. You paste it there, right? It just puts it in the front, right? Then you import the audio again, and this time you're going to import the exit audio, which is here, I think. Yep, that's the one. Same thing. Copy that. Go to the end of the episode here. Try to get as close to the end as possible, and paste it there, right? And that's it. And then you can kind of try it out over here if you want to by clicking over here and hit the play button.
Platform, Microsoft Azure. Your hosts, Cynthia Crane, Evan Basilik, Sujit D'Mello, Kendall Roden, Kel Teeter, and Russell Young discuss a different service or solution on each show, with subject matter experts to explain how to get started, how different services work, and how to make decisions in tricky scenarios. You can find out more about our podcast at azpodcast.com or follow us on Twitter at Azure Podcast.
Well, welcome back to the Azure Podcast. This is episode number 458, being recorded on the 26th of April, 2023, with special guest Elizabeth Graham. Now, you'll notice that when we did that, there was a little bit of a gap here, so I might go and just cut that out because that was a little too much. So we'll just get rid of that gap just so that it kind of flows a little easier. So that was the only thing I could see that was a little odd there. Yeah, so that's all it is with the post-production is just
on Twitter at Azure Podcast.
Well, welcome back to the Azure Podcast. That sounds better.
That's terrific.
Are there any other questions? I'm happy to take them.
Your URLs are on the website, on the BCUG website, I take it?
For the podcast? I'll
Yes.
put them over here. I just want to, I'll actually maybe put them in this chat over here.
Well, I think
Are we doing
I
chat on this?
had included, I thought the AzurePodcast.com. Is that what it is?
Yeah, azpodcast.com.
I think that's in your bio or in the description. If you go to the web page now, you'll be able to just click on bcug.com, click on the link, and it'll take you, as I said earlier in this meeting, to the bio and description of the presentation page. And that main link is in there. And presumably on your main link there, you'll direct people to everything else.
Yep. And the podcast link should be there.
Show us the AzurePodcast.com.
Yeah, so that's the podcast. That was where we were originally over here. Now this is I'm logged in as an administrator. That's why you see all these additional things over here. But let me just log off from here. And this is what you would see. And this is what I'm saying. This is the kind of that's a little app that I wrote to calculate the downloads, and it puts it here automatically every night. It goes and calculates all the downloads. This is the most recent episode we did, and it goes back a few episodes here. And then, of course, you can just, it's just like a normal page. We can go back to all the earlier posts and whatnot. But each episode has obviously some information about the topic, the speaker, the link to this is the URL for the MP3 file that is essentially the podcast. The one would be just you saw me editing in Audacity. The YouTube link is also here. Any resources that the guest gives us is here. And then at least in our podcast, the format that we've chosen is that at the start of every podcast, we spend a few minutes talking about what's new in the Azure space. And that's an optional thing. So there's some links about what's new over here as well. We put those links in here as well.
So I misspoke. I see it's azpodcast.com.
Yep.
Not Azure Podcast, but azpodcast.com.
AZ Podcast, yep. Yeah, and if you, I think if you go, look at it in Google, I suppose, and say, you just look for the Azure podcast, right? And the very first one should be us. And then, of course, you can see there's a link to the Apple, the podcast on the Apple iTunes, the podcast on the YouTube channel. Everything will show up with the very first four entries, and that's because I went into Google and I added our podcast URL 10 years ago, so it shows it on the top now.
But that one says the .net, not .com.
Yeah, and that's because so this azpodcast.com, you don't see it, but behind the covers, it is actually redirecting to that .net address. Of course, you'll just see it at azpodcast.com. And then, on the right-hand side here, we've added some additional information. We've put about, how you can find us on Spotify, YouTube. In some cases, people have asked us to create flyers if they want to share with the community. So there's a flyer that we created as well. You can download a flyer, and this flyer, you could pass it along to people in your, if you have like BCUG or something, if they want to keep copies of it or whatever. But we created this little flyer where people can download and, print and handouts kind of thing.
Did you start out using Zoom or something before Zoom? You're using Teams now, but Teams is new.
Yeah.
And Zoom is new.
We started on Skype actually originally. And then after Skype, we did Link, which was the follow-up to Skype. And then after Link, LYNC, that is. And then after Link came Teams. So Link and Teams made it really easy. With Skype, there was no built-in recording. So we had to use a third-party tool to bolt on recording in a Skype, in the Skype app. But with Teams and Link, it's kind of built in, so it's a lot easier.
So how many of the people who are on here are ready to start their own podcast about something? What would you want a podcast about if somebody started one, if not you?
Does anyone have like a topic that they feel very strongly about or, passionate about, things like that?
I've got several, but I'm hoping my time will get a little more free now.
You didn't get fired, right?
What was that?
Are you retiring?
No. I'm just hoping I don't have as many crises I have to deal with.
As I said, once initially it'll take more than a couple of hours a week, but beyond that, and it all depends on how frequently you do it, right? You can start by doing it once every 2 weeks if you want to, just to give you a little more space and not to take too much time. But as you get more comfortable with it, you'll find it's a lot easier. It's a lot more fulfilling, and maybe you could increase the frequency at that point.
TikTok became extremely significant recently. That's short videos.
Right.
Now, I don't know that video, you can send something much more quickly visually than you can speaking. But do you have any sense of what the number of users, the consumers of YouTube versus podcasts versus TikTok?
Yeah, the kind of, as you said, the format and the purpose for each of those is different, right? For each of them. Obviously, in the case of TikTok, it's kind of mostly entertainment, I suppose, right? And there are many that are informative as well. I don't use TikTok a lot, but I know that there are a few Microsoft people. Scott Hanselman is one of them. He's a popular podcaster who also now uses TikTok. And what he does is he uses the 60 seconds to talk about, just one thing really fast, right? One kind of topic. Maybe it's and he talks about Windows sometimes. Oh yeah, there's Windows 11 feature, blah blah blah, and he'll spend a whole 60 seconds talking about it. So yeah, you could do that. Again, because it has a video option to it, you can show things on the screen. You can put pictures on, and so and that's one format, right? But it requires somebody to look at a screen. So this is where the consumer has to be considered. If you want to have a captive audience who can look at a screen, who has the time to look at a screen, then using something like TikTok or YouTube makes a lot of sense because you are forcing people to look at a screen. But if you want people to listen to your thing without having to look at the screen, then having an audio option is very good. And when it comes to audio, you generally have to go with not the short, but the more like I said, 25 to 30 minutes, maybe even an hour length time. So in terms of the popularity, again, if it's for listening to content primarily, the more famous celebrities, I guess, have many subscribers. I mentioned some of them are making millions of dollars, to kind of host a podcast and to talk about things. But those are very few and far between, right? In the YouTube case, you can get a lot more of those kind of successes, right? In terms of people with having maybe 1 million or so subscribers, and you can certainly have more chances of finding them there. And in the TikTok case, it's kind of I suppose I don't know much about TikTok, so I don't want to say I don't want to speak for them, but I guess if it's probably more for younger audience is what I would guess. I know I don't want to look at something just for a minute and flip to something else or whatever. It's not something that I have gotten up used to yet.
Can I ask you something? Are you using a specialized camera? What kind of camera do you use?
It's a Logitech 4K camera. Yeah. What do you have? Your camera is pretty crisp out there, Ralph.
I'm using my phone as a camera.
This looks pretty good. I think you've got good lighting and everything. I think it helps. And what microphone is that? That's a toner microphone. That looks pretty cool.
Well, it's a toner or something. Yeah, toner.
Yeah. That's you've got good audio quality there. You could easily run a podcast from where you're sitting right now. You've got most of the setup already done.
There you go, Ralph. We're expecting something.
Okay, just a minute. I got to talk to my wife on the news.
Even if you just used it to produce some of your videos, sometimes you do. Yeah. You put together so many interesting videos coming at things from so many different angles, showing us your equipment and stuff like that.
This is what I use all the time.
Your enthusiasm comes across every time.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think you could certainly have a podcast or at least a YouTube channel if you don't already have one.
You say the enthusiasm. Now, you've been going 9 years, and you personally must have felt some ups and downs in your enthusiasm for things Azure, but they keep coming out with new stuff and changing things on you, right? I mean, what is it that keeps this burning?
Yeah, we were concerned about that when we first started. And really, the expectation was that we would have 20 episodes and then we would run out of content, right? That's what me and my colleague thought originally. We wrote up a list of the first 20 episodes. We said, yeah, we've got enough to talk about. So we started recording them one by one and just putting them out there because obviously we had no subscribers initially. And then suddenly the subscribers started to increase. But we didn't, we thought like, once we're done with 20 episodes, we won't have anything to talk about, right? And as it turns out, as you said, there was always something new coming out in Azure, and then so there was always something new to talk about. And then other people wanted to come on the show and talk about things. So, we started getting people coming on. So we had to do less talking. We did most of the asking of questions or interviewing style, playing the role of the interviewer, and then guests would come on and answer questions. And so we had to kind of prepare less at that point. Right nowadays, I don't have to prepare for an actual episode. I just have to make sure that we have enough of guests lined up, and typically we are booked around about 2 months out in our schedule.
What your one or two? I mean, do you listen? Are you a consumer of podcasts beyond your own? What are one or two of the ones that you find most interesting personally?
Yeah, the one that I do listen to occasionally is the NPR podcast. That's one of my favorite. And I listen to it actually on my Alexa device in the kitchen. I can just play it over there. So when I'm sitting there doing, cooking or something like that, I play the NPR podcast.
And if I were to search for that on Google or something, I just search for NPR podcast?
Yeah, NPR. They have a few. I think the one specifically that I think I listen to is called Fresh Air, I think. But they have actually more than one NPR podcast. And then, of course, I listen to some other tech podcasts as well. Occasionally, I mentioned Scott Hanselman. He's a popular podcaster, but he talks about all things, not specifically. He talks about lots about Windows, so definitely he covers a lot more breadth of topics in the computing space. Ours is focused primarily on Azure.
Is there any particular app that might make it easier as a consumer of podcasts to keep them organized and be able to sort? Can you make a suggestion? Yeah,
that's a good question, Sadie. So it kind of depends on, if you have the iTunes, an Apple device or an Android device. I'm assuming on your phone. You're talking about on your phone. So on the Android, I'm trying to remember the name of the app that I had on my Android phone. It'll come to me now. I'll have to send that to you after the fact. But on the iPhone, I use the Apple podcast app, which actually works very well. Spotify is also, if you do subscribe to Spotify, I found that to be very convenient because it kind of, you're listening to Spotify anywhere, and then it's very easy to just say, okay, I'll listen to, instead of, listening to Bruce Springsteen, I'm going to listen to, my podcast today or whatever. And so it's all there in one place, right? And that's one of the reasons why we put our podcast in Spotify, so that people can find us there as well. And it kind of lists it out exactly like you would all the other music. So in the middle of your music is all your podcasts. It's all in one place, So if you can listen to music a lot, I definitely say use the Spotify app to find the podcast. If you don't use Spotify, then and you have an iPhone, for sure use I think the Apple podcast app is actually very good. And the way that the podcast apps work is, you can configure them to download the podcast to your phone all at once. So this way, let's say we were going to go on a plane trip somewhere, you could tell the podcast to download all the like maybe the last 5 episodes onto your phone, and then listen to them offline. So you can certainly do that as well.
And the whole point of podcasts is, it's a podcast. It started with the iPod, which was audio only, like a Sony Walkman. And so it was meant to be something that you could stick in your pocket and put your headphones on and listen to while you were doing something else.
That's a good point.
And so, yes, you do have to search for something, but you probably searched for it and then downloaded it, and you know what's available there, and you have a way to index it that you would get used to on your phone.
Yeah, there's a fair amount of discovery that happens with podcasts, and the nice thing about it is that you can just subscribe to it. You listen to 1 or 2 episodes, it doesn't work, you unsubscribe, and then try something else, right? And so there's a bit of discovery involved there. All the podcast apps let you do that part very easily, where you can discover things. It'll give you a lot of information, metadata about the podcast. And many of them have reviews. Also about podcasts, if you see them, you'll see some people have likes and dislikes or whatever on the show. So you can use that to kind of narrow down what you want to listen to. So you can certainly, all of them, I think, do that to varying degrees. I'll send you the name of the one that I had in mind. It was not a free, I believe it was like $2 or $3 or whatever in the App Store. But some of the ones that cost a couple of bucks actually are a lot better than the free ones.
Hey, Sujit.
Yeah.
Andy, number one, go back to the part about how it's very simple and anybody can do this. And I missed that part at the beginning. No, great presentation. I'd be curious if you're going to make your slideshow available to us later on to look at. But I also had a question for you.
Yeah.
If I wanted to look for something about Linux, for instance, I can go to a handful of Linux sites like DistroWatch or Linux Today or whatever. If I wanted to know about music, there are different websites. Is there any sort of a clearinghouse or an index-based, kind of a neutral territory where you could search on podcasts rather than just going in and relying on Bing searches or Google searches looking for a particular webcast?
Yeah, that's there are a few of these marketplaces, and by the way, I will put the slides out. I'll send them to John and make them available. But so there are many of these clearinghouses, right? The problem is that each one of them is not complete, right? So if you go to one, they may have only some. If you go to another, they'll have another list. There's not one that has a full list. And that's why I suggest using just like a search engine. You look for any topic and put the word podcast after that, right? And that'll typically take you to the URL for the podcast, just like you saw with the Azure podcast when I shared it. Similar to that, you just have to use the word podcast in your search, and it should take you to a list of feeds that have those podcast sites.
Thank you.
But as Sandy Duma was asking, some of these apps have a good search feature built in as well. And so what the apps do is when you search in the app, it kind of filters out some of the results that it uses Google or Bing behind the scenes, but it filters out some of the results to make sure that these are really results related to podcasts as opposed to something else. So it does do a little bit of a better job of giving you the results in the app. And then, it kind of shows you pictures, you get some reviews, you get some additional information there. So I think searching from the app might be a good way to do it. But if you just want to jump on your computer and try things over there, just use any of the search engines should be fine.
Thank you.
Welcome. And if anyone's thinking of starting, a podcast, I'm certainly happy to help them, get through the initial hurdles, just so that the experience is a little better for them. Like I said, there's ways you can do this with very low cost, sometimes free. If you do it on Azure itself, if you host it on Azure, I know for a fact that I was just looking at it today in preparation for this, that you can get an Azure subscription for the most part for free for the first year. So this way is a good way for you to just try it out. If your podcast doesn't work out, it's not going to cost you much or anything at all, and you can then just cancel the subscription. So you can certainly do that as well if you just want to kick the tires a little bit. But you do have to have a bit of a commitment, like I said early on, to doing this. It is. It's a little bit of a time. Initially, it's going to take up some of your time just to line up content, create content, do some recordings, There'll be a lot of trial and error. You'll do the recordings one way, they won't work. You'll do it another way, they may work. You have to find the right kind of mix that works for you. We've just worked out a format that works for us, and it's our audiences come to expect it. Like I said, we have that little bit of introduction. We talk about some news, and then we talk to our guests, and we have a QA, like a very casual question answer format. So you got to find what format works for you or your audience, and that might take a little bit of trial and error before you get the right results. All right. Well, thanks so much all for all the great questions. It's really I enjoyed sharing all of this with you today, and thanks for all the attention.
This is great. Thank you so much, Sujit.
Welcome. Thank you.
Clapping.
Attaboy.
Attaboy. There we go. And
thanks.
There were tidbits in here which independently, like just you showing us how you did things with Audacity. Just that little piece for a few seconds was also educational all by itself, but it had a whole context around it as well. So really enjoyed that. Thank you so much for the time that you put in to preparing this for us and for sharing it with us. And I hope you continue to succeed with this.
Thank you. It was nice sharing with this audience. I enjoyed, of course, talking to all of you who were here. I enjoy listening to some of the other presenters that you have, and so it's nice to be able to also share what I know.
Yeah.